The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Chapter 2, Part 2. Oh, Mr. Tumnus, I'm so sorry to stop you, and I do love that tune, but really I must go home. I only meant to stay for a couple of minutes. It's no good now, you know, said the fawn, laying down his flute and shaking his head at her very sorrowfully. No good, said Lucy, jumping up and feeling rather frightened. What do you mean? I've got to go home at once. The others will be wondering what has happened to me. But a moment later she asked, Mr. Tumnus, whatever is the matter? For the fawn's brown eyes had filled with tears, and then the tears began trickling down his cheeks, and soon they were running off the end of his nose, and at last he covered his face with his hands and began to howl. Mr. Tumnus, Mr. Tumnus, said Lucy in great distress. Don't! What is the matter? Aren't you well? Dear Mr. Tumnus, do tell me what's wrong. But the fawn continued sobbing as if his heart would break, and even when Lucy went over and put her arms around him and lent him her handkerchief, he did not stop. He merely took the handkerchief and kept on using it, wringing it out with both hands whenever it got too wet to be any more use, so that presently Lucy was standing in a damp patch. Mr. Tumnus, bawled Lucy in his ear, shaking him. Do stop. Stop it at once. You ought to be ashamed of yourself, a great big fawn like you. What on earth are you crying about? Oh, sobbed Mr. Tumnus. I'm crying because I'm such a bad fawn. I don't think you're a bad fawn at all, said Lucy. I think you are a very good fawn. You are the nicest fawn I've ever met. Oh, you wouldn't say that if you knew, replied Mr. Tumnus between his sobs. No, I'm a bad fawn. I don't suppose there ever was a worse fawn since the beginning of the world. But what have you done? Said Lucy. My old father now, said Mr. Tumnus. That's his picture over the mantelpiece. He would never have done a thing like this. A thing like what? Asked Lucy. Like what I've done, said the fawn. Taken service under the White Witch. That's what I am. I'm in the pay of the White Witch. The White Witch? Who is she? Why, it's she that has got all Narnia under her thumb. It's she that makes it always winter and never Christmas. Think of that. How awful, said Lucy. But what does she pay you for? That's the worst of it, said Mr. Tumnus with a deep groan. I'm a kidnapper for her. That's what I am. Look at me, daughter of Eve. Would you believe that I'm the sort of a fawn to meet a poor innocent child in the wood, one that has never done me any harm, and pretend to be friendly with it, and invite it home to my cave, all for the sake of lulling it to sleep and then handing it over to the White Witch? No, said Lucy, I'm sure you wouldn't do anything of the sort. But I have, said the fawn. Well, said Lucy rather slowly, for she wanted to be truthful and yet not be too hard on him. Well, that was pretty bad, but you're sorry about it, and I'm sure you will never do it again. Daughter of Eve, don't you understand? Said the fawn. It isn't something I have done. I'm doing it now, this very moment. What do you mean? Cried Lucy, turning very white. You are the child, said Mr. Tumnus. I had orders from the White Witch that if I ever saw a son of Adam or a daughter of Eve in the woods, I was to catch them and hand them over to her. And you are the first I ever met, and I've pretended to be your friend and asked you to tea, and all the time I've been meaning to wait till you were asleep and then go and tell her. Oh, you won't, Mr. Tumnus, said Lucy. You won't, will you? Indeed, you really mustn't. And if I don't, said he, beginning to cry again, she's sure to find out, and she'll have my tail cut off and my horns sawn off and my beard plucked out, and she'll wave her wand over my beautiful cloven hoofs and turn them into solid, horrid hoofs like a wretched horse's. And if she is extra and especially angry, she'll turn me into stone, and I shall be only a statue of a fawn in her horrible house until the 4 thrones at Cair Paravel are filled, and goodness knows when that will happen, or whether it ever will happen. I'm very sorry, Mr. Tumnus, said Lucy, but please let me go home. Of course I will, said the fawn. Of course I've got to. I see that now. I hadn't known what to do, what humans were like until I met you. Of course I can't give you up to the witch, not now that I know you, but we must be off at once. I'll see you back to the lamp-post. I suppose you can find your own way from there back to Spare and Wardrobe? I'm sure I can, said Lucy. "We must go as quietly as we can," said Mr. Tumnus. "The whole wood is full of her spies. Even some of the trees are on her side." They both got up and left the tea things on the table, and Mr. Tumnus once more put on his umbrella and gave Lucy his arm, and they went out into the snow. The journey back was not at all like the journey to the Fawn's Cave. They stole along as quickly as they could without speaking a word, and Mr. Tumnus kept to the darkest places. Lucy was relieved when they reached the lamp-post again. "Do you know your way from here, daughter of Eve?" said Tumnus. Lucy looked very hard between the trees and could just see in the distance a patch of light that looked like daylight. "Yes," she said, "I can see the wardrobe door." "Then be off as quick as you can," said the Fawn. "And can you ever forgive me for what I meant to do?" "Why, of course I can," said Lucy, shaking him heartily by the hand. "And I do hope you won't get into dreadful trouble on my account." "Farewell, daughter of Eve," said he. "Perhaps I may keep the handkerchief?" "Rather," said Lucy, and then ran towards the far-off patch of daylight as quickly as her legs would carry her. And presently, instead of rough branches brushing past her, she felt coats, and instead of crunching snow under her feet, she felt wooden boards. And all at once she found herself jumping out of the wardrobe into the same empty room from which the whole adventure had started. She shut the wardrobe door tightly behind her and looked around, panting for breath. It was still raining, and she could hear the voices of the others in the passage. "I'm here," she shouted. "I'm here. I've come back. I'm all right."